Peace, Chiefs, and Dears is Bronzebird here with another video. Before I begin, like and subscribe. Thank you. So I've been noticing for a while a lot of these different things that's coming up with the alternative so-called black man who decides to have an arch, who starts to, remove himself from being the stereotypical so-called black man, which is a battle that a lot of brothers face, especially if they live in an urban environment in which they're not received well for being a quote unquote nerd or being someone who's into politics or someone who's trying to make change from the environment that they're from. And so this whole entire concept of the woke culture was supposed to start off as just a way of consciousness and aware of awareness and being one who understands the reality of the world or the reality of the land that we live in, especially here in America, especially if you speak to certain people who calls this place Babylon, right? My thing about it is the woke culture has started to become nothing more but a cesspool of wannabe know-it-alls who think that they're better than people because of the fact of the matter they have some type of knowledge or because they go against the average so-called white person when they have an argument. I mean, I never understood. Like for instance, in personal reflections, I was called woke at a certain time, and people would say, "Oh, Bronze is so woke," and this, that, and the third. And I never really liked being called woke. I never even liked acknowledging that I was called woke. Woke is bullshit as far as I'm concerned. But it's amazing how there's going to be this clip that comes up of a 17-year-old so-called black man, young boy who has a promising future, it seems like, especially when it comes to politics and how he's fed up with the nonsense about the woke culture, because he starts to understand that, especially when it comes to the woke culture, it's nothing more but a cesspool, especially when it comes to so-called black people who's seeking for white validation. And that's what they usually, a lot of this times, this whole entire pro-blackness is about, and about how people always want to have a conversation about the white man and the white woman, as if the so-called white man and so-called white woman do not have their own problems, especially rooted when they still have this whole entire gripe and this whole entire war when it comes to feminism and the traditional roles, which is being done away with in this society. So I'm going to show you this video right now so you can get a perspective of what I'm talking about and let the man speak and give his perspective about this whole entire woke culture BS. So Pete, fair use.
A senior at one of the most selective high schools in New York City is refusing to go woke. In a New York Post op-ed, Daniel E. Friends writes, "Even though I find myself in similar circles as my activist counterparts, I did none of those things. I'm a proponent of equality and pluralism, but I don't believe in the kind of self-aggrandizing virtue signaling that accompanies so much of woke politics." So well said. Daniel joins us now here on Fox Friends. Daniel, thanks for being here. So great.
Thank you for having me.
What an outstanding op-ed in the New York Post. I encourage everybody to check it out. Another thing you write is, "I'm a religious Christian and political conservative with an after-school job as a dishwasher at Panera." And you describe who you are at your core as an inoculation, which is fitting where we are right now, in sort of 3 stages and shots. If you would, what are the ways in which you were fortified as a young man, 17-year-old, with such a perspective of the world?
Well, first I would say the values that my parents have given to me is a very important shot, and it cannot be missed. Parents must be giving their children values, and they must be there for their children. And we've seen the full brunt of.
And see, the thing about it is, before this brother continues, it usually comes out to some type of thing where he fits some type of, not normalized, but a basic culprit. But this is a thing. I remember so many times when you come across brothers like this, young brothers like this, they usually make the marking of saying brothers like this are quote unquote coons or quote unquote quote unquote Oreos and all this other stuff because the way that he speaks, and then because of the fact of the matter, I'm not sure if it's true, but they just put the picture in there. It seems as if he comes from an adopted family. Maybe not. I don't know, because why do they have the photo of the so-called white people on the right of him? You know what I mean? The thing about it is that they always, the thing about it is it's very selective when so-called black people have this conversation about wokeness, because they try to be very selective on who's woke and who's not, especially by the way you carry yourself and the way that you move in this society. That you're one of those yippee-ki-yo-yay so-called black dudes who's trying to get an agreement or try to be on the same level as so-called white people, instead of being an independent man of thought and an independent man who could maneuver through this society without letting race be a main factor of conversation.
Or what happens when children don't get the values from their parents, notably the black community. And I would even contend, wealthier families, they don't spend enough time with their children.
Your Christian faith and the discipline your parents, they discipline you quite a bit, which now you're saying, hey, paid off for me.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I would say that my parents are more...
My fault, so you might not be adopted, but it was really weird that they brought up that photo.
I wouldn't say my parents aren't, or like my mother isn't a tiger mom, but I would say that my parents definitely did rule with an iron fist. But of course, as I've gotten older, they explain why they did certain things, and ultimately I've come to understand them.
Your second shot, you talk about the ability to go to a charter school, which is something that's under a lot of contention here. What has that done for your life?
Charter schools provide a lot of discipline, especially for children. Without that, without the first shot, which are parents. When you go to a charter school, you're supposed to have your uniform in check. You're supposed to have your belt, your shoes. If the charter school has church shoes that you're supposed to bring in. And
I mean, the concept of charter schools or parochial schools, as I start to understand it, even speaking from an anecdotal experiences, because I've attended plenty of those schools before. Yes, it does come with the concept that they're trying to teach you respect, professionalism, and how to look the part, especially when you go out in the real world. That you have to abide by a code, and a strict code, especially if you're trying to go into corporate America in the higher upper fields, especially with white collar jobs.
Whatnot, it's hardcore discipline. You're supposed to fold your hands, track the speaker, and those things will really, I would say, prepare a child for the real world in the future.
Absolutely. And then there's a history teacher that took you in. It's not that you lived in a cocoon. You've had the tough conversations with your peers and with teachers. You understand the other side of the equation. Those conversations were important.
Yeah, definitely. I would say that in the past year, usually we would do office hours after school, and office hours is usually 20 minutes just to give your grievance sense about like a test grade that was inputted incorrectly. But we spent more than 20 minutes talking about different ideas, and it was very refreshing seeing students who were normally scared to talk, speak with open minds.
Talk about refreshing. Talking to you is refreshing.
And the thing about it is, a lot of the times when they bring in this liberalism nonsense into schools nowadays, it's kind of like you are taught to shut up, because the thing about it is you can be expelled or be suspended and all these different things out here if you talk about things that is going on in contemporary in America, such as talking about the rainbow community or talking about things of wokeness and talking about BLM and all this other stuff. Like really go hard with this. Now, me growing up, we didn't talk about none of these issues like that. Now we know that it happened. We know that there was, I wasn't in high school when there was the Black Lives Matter going on. I wasn't in high school when that happened. But the thing about it is that that conversation now, it's crazy, because you can go on social media and see it all the time about how many times that they'll argue with a teacher. And I'm not talking about the students that's just doing stuff just to do stuff. You understand? Real big issues when it comes to racism, when it comes to gender politics, and when it comes to all these different things that go out here. Teachers start to become autocratic. They really start to become really much more of a tyrant. These students, a lot of them act rebellious, but it just seems as if more times once you start to realize it, how America is moving into communism and how it's affecting your children, especially when they get into their teenage years.
So many of your friends, so much of the culture, so much of social media has gone woke, has gone in that direction. Is it intimidating to kind of cut against the grain, or is it liberating?
Well, I would say that there are very few things in this world that aren't intimidating, but the question isn't whether it is intimidating or not, it is whether you have I would say the guts to continue on with it despite that intimidation.
That's right.
I'm intimidated by you just a little bit. This is an impressive young guy right here. This has not been the last you've heard from him. Daniel E. Friends. Daniel, thanks so much.
Thank you
Great
for having
article
me.
at the New York Post. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I'll also suggest everybody check out Barry Weiss's Substack. Yeah, definitely check it out.
It's where
And that's really about it about that issue. But you know, the whole entire nonsense about the woke culture, especially when it pertains to the so-called black man who is free of thought and is a free thinker and doesn't prescribe to unnecessary conversations in which it starts to become a loophole about acceptance and about how you should agree because you're trying to fight against the patriarchy. And as a so-called black man, you fit the notion for being a toxic, exhibiting toxic masculinity and all that bullshit. Because this is the thing. I know, especially when it comes to a lot of people, when they spread out words, especially so-called black men who I've had the pleasure of being in arguments with, when they start spreading wokeism concepts like toxic masculinity and all that dumb shit, they don't know where it comes from. They don't do research on where toxic masculinity comes from. They just keep telling you about prominent figures in feminism like Audre Lorde and stuff like that from like 1980s, because a lot of so-called black men are starting to be weak. And men in general are starting to be weak these days. They don't have no type of balls. They start to have a lot of these women walk over them and have a conversation on their behalves and then trying to make you feel sorry for being a man. You shouldn't have to be sorry for being a man, and you shouldn't have to be sorry for going against the wokeism bullshit, is my point. My thing about it is, at the end of the day, what you see this inspiring young man and this intelligent young man in the video is that more or less you shouldn't be afraid to voice your opinions from this wokeism culture. Wokeism is nothing more but some type of Luciferian front that they're trying to put out there for the world to see as they move towards communism. And they need all these different things to happen so that you can conform and so that you can believe in the whole entire nonsense that they're spewing, not even knowing that this probably was an experiment from probably early on, half a century ago, more than half a century ago. And they're not really trying to tell you because, like I said, not a lot of people don't do research on these words that they use and that they believe that this is just what it is and that this is really about them fighting against the man and fighting against the system. When the man is knowing full on well that he put this system in order for division and to sit up there and gad at, especially men. Now, so-called black men just have to take the brunt of this whole entire conversation, which I don't understand, because there's no reason why, especially if you hear from the triggering so-called black women on certain conversations, and I'm talking about liberal so-called black women, as another YouTuber would usually say, that I don't even understand why they bring in so-called black men as saying he exhibits toxic masculinity. It escapes my mind so much, I don't understand, because the so-called black man doesn't even rule. So how the hell could he be applicable to toxic masculinity if there's a such thing? Not ignoring that you do have spoiled apples of the bunch. I don't deny that at all. You do have so-called black men who will flex the idea that they are a man against a woman. But to sit up there and say, especially in this case, the so-called black man exhibits toxic masculinity, please. He's more or less trying to call a so-called black woman a queen before he calls her any other name out the book that might be demeaning and cruel. So think about that. Think next time you start to participate in this woke culture. Peace.